Businesses are happy, consumers are downbeat, and there are very early signs that inflation pressures are easing. That's the upshot of a slew of economic news yesterday. Telstra sticks up for its main competitor, Optus, and after 2 years of rising prices, the cost of second-hand cars finally starts to fall. It's Wednesday, the 12th of October, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, a very big day today, and I know you're excited. There is another episode of our new podcast, our newest podcast, How Do They Afford That? This comes out every Wednesday, Fear and Greed. I've been talking about it a lot over the last week, really. So we've teamed up with Canna Campbell from financial literacy platform Sugar Mama TV. It is a weekly podcast full of tips and hints. And what else, Sean?
Well, it's all about making your money go further, isn't it, Michael?
And hacks as well.
And hacks. Oh, sorry.
I would have gladly accepted hacks, but I'm always happy for you to add more in. It's about kind of managing your household budget, investing during a cost of living crisis, all that kind of thing. Today's topic, Sean, we get right into what to do when you're a saver and your partner is a spender. So it gets a little bit kind of salacious at times.
Fear and greed gets salacious.
That's right. So it's called How Do They Afford That? The link is in today's show notes, and you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. It is definitely worth a listen. I know I'm biased, but I think you'd agree with me, wouldn't you, Sean?
Absolutely. I will be going straight after this broadcast to download it. Well, it will already be downloaded because, of course, I follow it, and I can't wait to listen, Michael.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, immediately after the show, which is kind of just before you are listening to How Do They Afford That?
Good point.
You have an interview with Brian O'Kelly, who is better known as, this is fantastic, the godfather of ad tech.
What a moniker, eh? He was one of the inventors of programmatic advertising, co-founding a group called AppNexus, which really did take digital advertising by storm. It changed how that whole system works. Now he's worried about the emissions around digital advertising. It's not a backflip, just more like a 180 turn on it, really. And he has a new company, Scope 3, to address that very challenge. Really fascinating chat with Brian.
Yeah, I think I really loved the moment when you asked him, basically kind of acknowledging now the problems around the industry that he had a big role in kind of developing. What would you do differently if you could go back and do it all again? What would you change? So it's a fascinating chat. It's coming up a little bit later on. But the main story this morning, Sean, consumer confidence is at its lowest level in 10 years, but business confidence is buoyant. There are signs that inflationary pressures in the economy are easing, and credit and debit card data suggests that households might just be reining in their spending. That's pretty much the last 24 hours in economics. That is huge.
Yes, so much going on. Let's start with the consumer confidence. It fell back slightly this month, and while it has bounced from its August lows, it's still deeply in negative territory, according to the Westpac Melbourne Institute Index. It's around its lowest level since 2009, and then before that, the early 1990s, when the economy was in recession. But there was a very interesting nuance in the survey. Those questioned before last Tuesday were more negative than those questioned after last Tuesday. Why do we care? Well, on Tuesday last week, the Reserve Bank lifted the cash rate by a smaller than expected 25 basis points. Clearly, consumer confidence is very, very sensitive to interest rates.
And then it's the opposite story for business.
That's right. Business conditions improved further last month and are now back above pre-COVID levels, according to the National Australia Bank Business Confidence Index. But confidence, business confidence this is, has pulled back somewhat, though remains around long-run averages, so you certainly can't say they're pessimistic. Significantly, input and labour cost growth, so the cost of hiring someone, the cost of buying things for your business, the growth in that continues to show signs of easing. That suggests that inflation pressures are coming off the boil somewhat. Now, National Australia Bank Chief Economist Alan Oster said consumers were clearly finding a way to continue spending, helped by a very strong labour market, savings buffers, and a broad post-pandemic recovery. All those things play a role, and business conditions were strong in all sectors, including construction. So the two sides of the coin there, consumers not happy, businesses really happy.
Sean, you mentioned interest rates, and it looks like those hikes from the RBA are starting to be felt in homes around the country.
Yes, the Commonwealth Bank said household spending declined in September for the first time since rates started rising back in May. The Combank's household spending intentions index also fell about 0.5%. Now, these partial indicators from the banks, which have plenty of data on what's being spent on credit cards and debit cards and the like, they've really added a new dimension to economists' world. For example, the latest data shows that the biggest decline in spending comes in health and fitness, home buying, household services and transport, and it's real-time data. We're not waiting 3 months to see what happened. We're actually seeing it in real time.
All right, Sean, there's a lot of data there, a lot of different kind of reports and things. I'm kind of an executive summary kind of guy. So I'm just going to ask you, what does it all mean?
Well, it's kind of good news. We get so caught up with falling financial markets and equities and bonds and the Aussie dollar. We kind of sometimes forget that the real economy, what's happening is in cities and towns and on farms across a nation, it's kind of doing okay. Consumers are glum, but they're still spending money. Businesses are pretty happy. If the Reserve Bank's move on interest rates can put a lid on inflation, the domestic economy, at least, is looking okay.
Well summarised. Local markets, what happened yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 finished down 0.3% to 6,645 points. The industrials were the best performers, while the energy, technology and real estate sectors did worst. Given all the action recently, there wasn't a huge amount going on among the large caps at least. Diversified miners South 32 closed down 3%, while Fortescue Metals and Woodside Energy both dropped 2%. Commonwealth Bank was down 1%. James Hardie Industries was a strong performer, up nearly 2%, while Toll Road Group Transurban was up about 0.5%.
And international markets?
Well, no surprises, but the trend among global equities indices is down. We know that. One worth a mention this morning, though, is Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, which yesterday fell below 17,000 points for the first time since the height of the global financial crisis back in May 2009. Oil prices have come off a touch over the past 24 hours, while iron ore prices have risen. The Aussie dollar dipped below 63 US cents yesterday morning and kept going. It's currently trading at about 62.5 US cents, a little above that. And former US Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, along with 2 other US-based economists, for research into the fallout from bank failures. Congratulations, Mr. Bernanke.
Yes, indeed. All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Telstra held its annual general meeting yesterday for its more than 1 million shareholders, and Chair John Mullen stuck up for the group's main competitor.
Yes, Mr. Mullen wasn't about to criticise Optus for the data breach of a couple of weeks ago, and instead urged companies to avoid complacency when it comes to protecting customer data. It's very unusual for one company to stand up for its biggest competitor. But Mr. Mullen said everyone should avoid hubris in this situation because no organisation can ever be 100% fully protected. The chair yesterday also said he'd step down next year. The annual general meeting was the first for new CEO Vicky Brady. It was focused very much on the completion of Telstra's T22 strategy. That was all about simplifying the business, including lots and lots of job losses. Also, the AGM went into its plans to expand its regional network and 5G capacity and its proposed corporate restructure. As I mentioned earlier, Telstra's share price finished up 0.5%, so shareholders obviously like what they heard.
Yeah, indeed. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you actually spoke to the Optus CEO a couple of weeks ago before the cyber attack, you asked her about the fact that telcos seem to get quite personal at times. That just like airlines, they are really the sectors that don't hesitate to stick the boot in.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe it's just one decent cyber hack and everyone thinks there, but for the grace of God, go themselves. And I think, Telstra, a massive company, does a great job on cybersecurity. But as Mr. Mullen said, you can't be 100% sure. So he's not about to start throwing stones.
And actually, Sean, on that topic, the ACCC chair has blasted Optus, saying the telco's lack of transparency over its massive data breach is making customers confused and anxious.
That's right. Gina Cass-Gottlieb said Optus isn't providing customers with clear information about the breach. Appearing before a House of Representatives committee yesterday, she said reports of scams are spiking as criminals attempt to use the data to cheat individuals, while the bulk of the information that affected nearly 10 million Optus customers hasn't yet appeared on the dark web. 10,200 names have. Ms. Cass Gottlieb said there's been a small number of losses to remote access scams where the scammer said they were from Optus. Meanwhile, the Office of the Australian Information Commission will investigate whether Optus handled consumer data in line with Australian privacy principles. Any single contravention could cost the telco giant up to $2.2 million in fines.
All right. Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers called rising power prices the most problematic factor in our inflation problem.
That's right. He said rising power prices were the result of what's happening around the world, extreme weather that's disrupted power stations, and the fact that Australia hasn't had a stable policy environment for energy, at least not until recently. The comments came after several CEOs of energy companies agreed that retail electricity prices will rise 35% next year. And the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission Chair, Gina Cass-Gottlieb, said the median household electricity bill had risen $300 just since April, an incredible rise. Dr. Chalmers is on his way to Washington for the IMF World Bank annual meeting. It'll be a pretty grim affair with the outlook for the global economy deteriorating and a recession likely in several major economies. Ahead of boarding the plane, Dr. Chalmers said a global recession has gone from a possibility to a probability, but he also added he thought that Australia could avoid one.
Defence Minister Richard Marles says Australian troops could be sent to Ukraine to help train the country's armed forces.
That's right. He made the comments after what he described as an appalling attack on Kyiv by Russian forces, which killed at least 11 people. Moscow launched a barrage of missiles on Kyiv Monday evening, Australian time, in response to the blowing up of a bridge between Crimea and Russia last week. Mr. Miles said Australia needed to support Ukraine over the long term so they can resolve the conflict on their own terms. Under consideration is both sending personnel to train up Ukrainian forces and also supplying more weapons. However, the Ukrainian representative in Australia last night said, more or less, thanks but no thanks, as it might end up being a distraction to the main game, which of course is fighting Russia.
All right. Sean, second-hand car prices, I mentioned this one at the top of the show, they're falling fast after spending much of the COVID years on the rise.
It was an unusual anomaly in the market that because supply chains were severely disrupted during COVID, people couldn't get new cars delivered. Also, there was a global shortage of semiconductor chips, and many cars just couldn't get built. So the price of used cars soared. According to Moody's Analytics, used car prices are still 15% higher than a year ago and more than 60% higher than pre-pandemic, but they're coming off and have fallen for 4 months in a row. According to the Financial Review, the biggest driver of the downward pressure on car prices is, of course, the increase in the supply of new vehicles.
So basically, if you've got an old hatchback sitting in the driveway,
get rid of it now.
Got it. All right, I mean, we're not giving advice or anything here.
No.
But sell it. Sean, retailer Baby Bunting's share price tumbled 20% yesterday after it warned its profits have been hammered by inflation and the weak Aussie dollar.
It's a good case study in how the global economy is affecting local retailers. The Australian economy is going okay. We spoke about that earlier in the show. And total sales at Baby Bunting in the September quarter were actually up 12%. But input costs surged with domestic freight prices higher and the weaker Aussie dollar pushing up the cost of imported products, which Baby Bunting buys and puts on the shelves to sell retail. The maternity and baby goods retailer was a high flyer during the pandemic, but it's really come off the boil since then. Its share price is about half of what it was when it topped out in late 2021.
Victoria is in the midst of a significant downpour with more than 100 mils expected today and tomorrow.
Premier Daniel Andrews said even minor amounts of rain would be a risk in terms of flooding because catchments are full. And what's expected over the next 48 hours or so is much more than minor rain. The intensity of the rain is expected to peak tomorrow. There's a risk of flash flooding. All Victorians need to take great caution.
Yeah, it really hasn't been a good time for Victorians with all sorts of chaos at Melbourne Airport as well yesterday.
Did you see the photos? Quite incredible. Basically, there was a security breach and Qantas evacuated the terminal and disembarked 2 fully boarded planes. Someone went from the land side to the air side without being screened. So everyone was sent back to be screened again, including 2 plane loads of people. Anyway, it caused chaos. It's been sorted out, but it's just quite amazing. One person missing security, what they can do to thousands of travellers.
Yeah, it just shows what a well-oiled machine it is when everything's just working as it should.
Well, that's true. Yes.
And then all of a sudden this goes wrong and it is chaos.
Yeah.
Sean, moving on to overseas news, and you mentioned before the situation in Ukraine, US President Joe Biden has condemned, quote, the utter brutality of Russia's missile barrage at civilian targets in Ukraine, which was a significant escalation of the conflict now in its 8th month.
Mr. Biden didn't specify how the US would respond to the attacks, but signalled he could approve new sanctions on Russia and weapon shipments to Ukraine. He said the US and its allies would continue to impose costs on the Kremlin and provide the support necessary for Ukrainian forces to defend their country and their freedom. The bombardment, as I mentioned earlier on, killed at least 11 people. It wounded 64 others, while knocking out electricity in 5 regions, as well as disrupting power in Kyiv and other parts of the country.
And finally, Sean, Japan has started accepting vaccinated visitors from 68 countries, including Australia, ending 3 years of tight border controls.
Michael, and given the yen is so weak, at least against the US dollar, and inflation is relatively low, Japan is looking like an affordable and attractive destination for that overseas holiday. Japan is one of the last major economies to reopen for tourism. So far, around 4,000 tourism-related companies have folded due to restrictions, according to Bloomberg. The announcement sent Japan's airline stocks higher, and apparently online searches for holidays in Japan went through the roof. I'm sure there's a lot of Australian skiers currently looking up where to go on holiday in Japan.
I reckon you might be right. All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. We mentioned it at the top of the show. Brian O'Kelly, better known as the godfather of ad tech.
I love talking to anyone that's known as the godfather of anything, including ad tech. Yep, he's the guy who really revolutionised the use of digital ads on the internet. Really fascinating chat.
Would you like us to start calling you the godfather of fear and greed? You had to know that was coming, right?
GF of F and G. I like it.
Yeah, it's got a certain kind of ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that interview is coming up next. It is a cracker in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 12th of October, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Don't forget to check out our new podcast, How Do They Afford That?, featuring Canna Campbell from Sugar Mama TV. As I mentioned, it is a new episode out today, What to Do When You're a Saver but Your Partner is a Spender. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.